What's up, everybody? This is John with John Fair Innovations, bringing you more League of Legends Worlds 2021 content. We have had a crazy world so far. We've seen tiebreakers, we've seen upsets, we've seen dominance, we've seen hero stories, and it has just been an absolutely amazing world. One of my favorites to watch, certainly by far, because every possibility is always available. It doesn't seem like it's a foregone conclusion that we have one team beating the other team. Unless, of course, it's Darwin playing, but that's a different story for a different video. Now, today we are going to be doing a bit of a preview for the quarterfinals. So we're going to be looking in depth at the first qualifying series. So now we've hit, of course, best of fives. And the first quarterfinal, I should say, is of course between T1 and Harmer Live. So a domestic LCK matchup. And this, of course, guarantees that out of the 4 LCK teams that have made it to quarterfinals, at least one will be represented in semifinals, because obviously one of these two teams has to advance. Now, T1, of course, came first in their group. They had a very dominant performance. They had an excellent showing. You love to see what you saw out of T1. They, of course, came first in their group with EDG, and they had, very, very strong performances. The only game they dropped was their very first game to EDG, and they came back with their second lot of games where they went 3-0 on the day. So very impressive and in some really good form. Harmer Life, of course, were the 4th seed of the LCK and the 2nd seed to make it out of Group C. Harmer Life, of course, had to play play-ins. They qualified 2nd in theirs, again having to play a best of 5, and they defeated Beyond Gaming. Ups and downs for their tournament, but overall, consistently, they've been steadily improving, and they are looking to be in pretty good form. They almost took first in their group that had RNG, Fnatic, and of course PSG. So certainly not playing weak League Legends by any means, and they seem to be ramping up a lot more. And what's good if you're a Harmer Life fan is that it's not just Chovy that is playing amazing. These wins aren't just, well, Chovy's one of the best players in the world and he's just stomping on people. This is really solid performances from Willa, from Vista. Morgan is showing some good gameplay in some of the games. And of course, Deft is playing at a really high level at the moment, which is great to see from such a legacy player in Deft. So as we go into the quarterfinal, of course, we look at the players individually. So firstly, looking at T1, a lot of their gameplay does focus around Kana. Kana is very important to this team because he generally plays a lot of weak side, but by no means is someone who's being carried by the team. He gets a lot of advantages in lane by himself, and that's why you'll see champions like Jace, like Kennen, like Gwen, champions that are very self-sufficient in lane and then can help and impact team fights later on, especially on the Kennen. He's very, very strong on that. Comfort, of course, for him is Jace. He plays Jace a lot. In the LCK, gets banned against him a lot because of how good he is on the champion. Seems like most LCK top laners, though, are really, really quality Jace players. But certainly Kana's is one that is feared a lot more than some others. His Gwen is very underrated. And the reason why I've got that there is because I do expect him to pull out a Gwen. Gwen is something that he'll go to when he feels like, or when T1 feels like he's going to get camped and dived a lot, because obviously Gwen has so much sustainability, has so much survivability, and also Gwen doesn't need that many resources to become useful later on. Basically, once she gets her mythic, she's pretty much good to go. So Kana, definitely someone we have to look for T1 if they are going to win this best of 5, and of course make a deep run into the tournament. Owner is the rookie sensation for T1. Very unknown commodity, of course. Took over mid-season from Cuz. Cuz a very historic player within the LCK, so it was quite significant that Owner took over from Cuz. Of course, Cuz multiple time LCK champion, so not someone who is weak by any means. So this kind of indicates the level of Owner's gameplay in scrims that led to the point for him to be in the starting roster, and he's held that spot pretty much consistently since then. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of the level of gameplay Owner has been showing in the LCK. We've seen him at Worlds. He's had some very good performances. His Talon game, of course, against Detonation Focus Me was very scary and kind of showed why Talon jungle is a very, very scary thing to face. But when we're looking at Owner, you'll notice that he has a lot of these sort of bruisery AD champions, a lot of champions that want to build Gore Drinker, of course with the exception of Poppy. But Owner, generally speaking, plays a lot of AD junglers. And the reason why is because Faker typically likes to play AP, and as we've seen from Kana's champion pool as well, he likes to play things like Kennen and Gwen as well. So you'll find that the solo laners for T1 a lot of time play a lot of AP, which puts Owner on a lot of AD duty. And so that's why you'll see things like the Xin Zhao, the Viego, the Poppy. Poppy has become something of a very interesting jungle pick and a huge counter to these assassin junglers. And of course, very difficult for ADCs like Misfortune, for example, to play the game. And also, I think a lot of people see it as a counter to, of course, the Yuumi, Poppy's ulti and Poppy's wall stun. Very, very strong against Yuumi. Owner, he gets criticized a little bit for predictable jungle paths. And I do expect very predictable jungle paths. The reason why he got the criticism in the first place is because people like Cadril, for example, noticed the trend that he was doing against Harm or Life. But a big part of that as well is because T1 sees a big mismatch between Kana and Morgan. So he's generally going to want to path towards that top lane for either a gank or to create a split map in the jungle and allow Kana to have the 1v1 against Morgan. If we're talking about T1, always have to talk about the unkillable Demon King himself, the god of the mid lane, the king. He's back and he's better than ever. Faker. What can you say about Faker that hasn't been said in his historic career? The guy is the greatest of all time, and that's not even for debate. I'll happily engage with people in any other conversation except when it comes to who's the greatest of all time, because it's just the fact that Faker is the GOAT. Faker, he is a big reason as to why we all play and love this game and watch so much professional League of Legends, because, Faker, he's an icon. Now, when we're looking at Faker, his champion pool is very different to what it was when he first came on the scene and was that, mechanical 1v1 outplay, hyper carry mid laner. We look a lot more for utility in Faker's gameplay now. So you see a lot of Twisted Fate and Rise, for example. Twisted Fate, I think, is seen as the strongest mid laner in professional league at the moment, just because of the utility of the ultimate, both with gank ability and also vision control that you get from Destiny. So, and then Rise, of course, has his Realm Warp. So a lot of teams see this as really powerful in order to be able to get a lead for. Typically, teams use it to leverage a lead in their top lane and snowball from there. And I certainly could see T1 wanting to implement that. So I think Twisted Fate and Rise are going to be really, really heavily sought after for T1 if they're going to win this series. And Faker typically plays for this anyway. He was one that was bringing out Twisted Fate in the LCK, kind of when other people were really, when Showmaker and Chovy were focusing more on LeBlanc priorities. So this is a games play style that T1 really enjoys to play. They really do like Twisted Fate, Rise, mid priority, and Roam ability. And of course, if we're going to talk about Faker, you do have to talk about his Azir. His Azir is legendary. So amazing to think that the reason why he was benched by T1 was because he wasn't a really good Azir player, and Azir was broken in the meta, and he's worked tirelessly to not only improve his Azir play, but be one of the best Azir players that we've ever seen. It makes me think of, if for any Naruto fans out there, how, Naruto, he was terrible at Shadow Clone Jiu-Jitsu, and then he worked on it, and it ended up being the trademark of his moveset, his abilities. And it makes me think of Faker. When I hear about that, it makes me think of Faker, Faker as well, because Faker, he was not the best Azir player by any means, and so much so that he was benched because of it. And now he's seen as the benchmark of what we expect of top tier Azir play. For the bot lane, I've got here Gumayusi and, of course, Teddy. Not sure which one we're going to see. Probably going to see more Gumayusi than we are going to see Teddy, but I would not be surprised to see Teddy in this series. I think the reason why we didn't see him on day 2 was because day 2 of Group B was because T1 were fighting for that number 1 spot, so that's why they kept Gumayusi in. I think if they had secured second, but they had no chance of getting first, then we would have seen a little bit of Temple of Teddy. Now, Gumayusi, really, really talented. I think he's a lot stronger in lane than Teddy is. I do think Teddy, though, is a bit better at team fighting, so it kind of is dependent on how T1 want to play these games, whether they feel that win lane, win game is kind of the strategy they want to go for. That's the case. They'll probably go Gumayusi. If they feel, though, that they're going to have to scale, these games are going to go late, and it's going to come down to team fighting, then you probably see a bit more Teddy than you will see Gumayusi. Now, these champions to watch will change depending on the player. I tried to keep it to the ones that they share. So Aphelios, Misfortune, and of course Draven. Aphelios and Draven are very big for both of these players. They absolutely love the two champions. Massive Draven players, and they're really, really strong in Aphelios. Teddy, not really known about Teddy. Everyone knows about the Ezreal. His Ezreal is the stuff of nightmares. I think of the game against Gen G where he just was 1v3ing a team fight there, or 1v4. It was something crazy like that. And his Ezreal is so clean. But something that's not really known about Teddy is that he's actually a massive Misfortune player. He loves playing the champion. He plays it a lot on solo queue. Well, he used to anyway. I haven't checked much of his solo queue recently, but certainly in years past, he played a lot of Misfortune. And they actually, SKT at MSI 2019 did pull out Misfortune in one of the games when she wasn't meta at the time, purely because of how much and how good Teddy is on the champion. So something to keep an eye on. And if you are someone who feels Misfortune is the most broken ADC in the game right now, then Teddy's value to the team becomes that much more significant, because he is one of the best Misfortunes on the planet. As it stands, though, I do think they'll look to challenge Deft in lane, so that's why I expect to see Gumayusi as opposed to Teddy. Of course, then, lastly, we have our support, which is Carrier. Carrier is the best support, you would say, in the world right now. Now, you might argue maybe Ming you think is better, Miko is better, but a lot of people do rate Carrier as the best. And certainly, I think he has the most versatile champion pool when it comes to supports. I've got here Yuumi. Keria is not really known as a Yuumi player, but given the nature of how broken Yuumi is at the moment, Yuumi has to be talked about. But if we're going to be talking about Keria, I think Keria, especially with the ADCs that both Gumayusi and Teddy like to play, expect to see a lot of Leona and Thresh. Because I can see Gumayusi and or Teddy pulling out Aphelios and Draven, and of course Misfortune, and we know how strong Leona and Thresh are with those champions. And if you don't know much about Keria, all you really need to know is that his Leona is maybe the best Leona in the game that we have right now. And just Google a game. There was a game, I forget where it was, but there is like, if you YouTube a game between Damwon and T1, and it's like Keria's Thresh, he solo wins that game. Like, that game was one of the few times I've ever seen Damwon ever get stomped, and it was on the back of how insane his Thresh was. He just did not miss a Q at all. It's just so insane. I've never seen Thresh play to that level before. I'm to be that impressed by a Thresh, I have to think back to Samsung White Martyr. Like, that's the level of how the quality of that Thresh play was. So, like, that's why I've got that one there, because that game is stuck in my head, and given the strength of Thresh with the champions that are meta in ADC at the moment, really expect, if he doesn't get his hands on Leona, to possibly pull out the Thresh. Harmor Life, of course, everything revolves around mid lane, and when we talk about Harmor Life, we talk about how much can Chovy get out of his other lanes, and how much can he then carry, because we know Chovy's going to be really strong. I expect Chovy to win lane against Faker, but the question is whether that will be enough, and how much more advantage do T1 get over the other sides of the map. Morgan gets memed a lot. I'm actually a Morgan defender. I don't think Morgan's as bad as everyone makes him out to be. I think Morgan, unfortunately, the games where he gets beaten up on look really, really ugly. And so that's why it can leave a bit of a poor image in people's heads. But you got to remember, as I said, I've said this multiple times, I'll say it again, Morgan gets compared to top laners like Khan, like Xiaohu, like Nuguri, like Keen, like Kana. Like, these are really, really top tier top laners. The top laners that I mentioned there are probably the 5 best top laners that we have in League of Legends. So, for him to be considered bad because he gets, easily taken down by these level players, I don't think is necessarily a representation of the level of play Morgan actually represents. We saw that he had pretty decent games in the group stage. I think the only game where you could really say that he got sort of outplayed and gapped is against Xiaohu, but I'd argue how many top laners in the world wouldn't get gapped by Xiaohu. So again, saying that Morgan's bad because he got, gapped by Xiaohu, because he gets beaten by Khan, is kind of a bit of an unfair representation of Morgan's true ability. Now, what I liked Harmor Life doing is rather than focusing on meta for Morgan, they just got comfort for him. So we saw Renekton, and while Renekton is not the strongest champion in the meta right now, I like the fact that they put him on Renekton. He is a champion that uses Gore Drinker. We know how broken the Mythic is right now. So getting him on a champion that can use Gore Drinker and also has utility as the game goes on. Might obviously not able to carry, but certainly, has stuns, can protect your ADC, can protect your mid laner in team fights with reliable stuns. And also can buy a lot of time with Sterex and the ultimate and the Gore Drinker, and also the heal that you get from Renekton's ability. You can really, it's almost like having two stopwatches. And we know how strong having a stopwatch or having a Zhonya's can be in a team fight. So I liked the fact that Morgan was on this, and he looked a lot more comfortable than when he did on some of the other meta champions. Kennen is, I think, the champion that both these top laners are going to be sort of contesting for in draft, because I think Kennen, to me, is... I actually think it's this one of the strongest top laners in the game right now. I actually prefer it more than Graves. I know Graves is considered the best top laner, and that's because of obviously the sustainability, and it just seems like it's an easy lane. But to me, the Kennen just provides so much usefulness in team fights. It rarely loses lane. Energy champions as well always have a good time in lane because they don't have to expend mana. And they don't really have the same problems that mana users have. And obviously, a champion that has reliable stun always makes it easy for ganks. So Kennen, to me, I think is going to be the champion that is probably going to be most contested for. Whether we see it banned or whether we see it picked early blind in draft is remain to be seen. Morgan also very strong on Aatrox. He's pulled it out a couple of times now. I do expect that, if maybe the champions, like if he gets targeted a little bit in draft, he might resort to an Aatrox. I can see a world where T1 decides to really try and get Kana a massive advantage and really target Morgan in draft. Of course, next up we have our jungler, which is Willa. Willa has had a pretty good tournament. He has shown a lot more from this tournament than many, myself included, expected out of Willa. So it's really great to see if you're a Harmer Life fan. I think he's looked really good on the Lee Sin, and he's also had some pretty decent games on the Taliyah. He seems to be preferring champions, or he seems more comfortable on champions that can that have strong ganking ability and also have strong pick ability. So can expect to see more of that. I do expect to see him try to get his hands on Lee Sin. I think this is his best champion by far. He looks so much more different and so much more proactive and strong on the Lee Sin than he does on other champions. So I can really see where Harmer Life just first picks Lee Sin just to get him on that champion, just to get him on some comfort, but also get him on one of the strongest, if not the strongest jungler that we have in the meta right now. And of course then Willa can cover for Morgan more and potentially gank for mid lane and bot lane. And obviously contest for things like Scuttle and Vision Control. Taliyah and Nidalee I've got here because not necessarily that I think these are his strongest champions, but because of what I know of Chovy. Now I know Chovy, unlike Faker, loves his AD mids. He loves picking... he's someone who used to pull out the Camille mid, for example, or he'd have set mid. He's someone who really does enjoy playing AD mids. He's not afraid to play bruisers or melee in mid, and it's actually ridiculous that he can play melee mids and not get punished by the range disadvantage. So because of that, I do expect to see Harmer Life, if they can't get their hands on the Lee Sin, move towards getting Willow an AP champion in the jungle. And so that's why the two that I think the most of when I think of Willa are, of course, Taliyah and Nidalee. But obviously, I wouldn't be the biggest fan of putting Willa on Nidalee, just because I'd want something that has a little bit more reliable setup, easier setup. At least the Taliyah, she has her abilities that can make it easy to lock down a target. Now, when we're talking about Harmer Life, this mid matchup is pretty hype because while we have the unkillable Demon King on one side, we have, of course, the leader of the Church of Chovy. Namesake mid laner. He is the best laner in the world. Best laner I've ever seen. I don't even think Faker Prime was as good of a laner as Chovy is right now. Chovy's lane is just the best. Like, what can you say? He gets advantages that you that you don't even realize he's getting advantages from. Minion control, the trades he chooses, how he holds the wave, and then when he knows exactly when to crash the wave. Like, he's just so precise and so perfect. And you look at the mid lane and you're like, oh, okay, Chovy 0-0-0. Oh, okay, yeah, he's got some CS. And then you look at the CS difference between him and the opposing mid laner. Like Niski, for example. Niski got so much attention mid, and Chovy got no attention mid at all. Niski got top lane ganking for him, he got support ganking for him, and he also got jungle ganking for him. And yet somehow Chovy still had like a crazy CS lead over him in a matchup where he was Yasuo into Niski's Rise. So Niski also had the range advantage, and somehow Chovy still was able to get a CS lead and get a gold lead over Niski. It's the insane nature of just how good Chovy is in lane, is that he was getting the old solo queue, 4 people trying to just gank his lane, and he still was able to get ahead. Just Chovy, as I said, will go down. I think he'll go down in history as the best laner we've ever seen, unless someone else, of course, comes along. But at this stage, Chovy, to me, is untouched when it comes to purely laning. Now, I've got here his Sylas, because, as I said, I think Willa will look for Lee Sin first, and I think they'll want to play Willa on Lee Sin. That will be their first priority. And if we see that case, then Chovy will look towards an AP mid, and Sylas, to me, is the champion of his that I think Harmer Life should go to more, especially if we see Faker picking Rise and picking Twisted Fate. Sylas's valuability becomes a lot stronger, because obviously you can hijack the Twisted Fate destiny, and you basically have your own version of Twisted Fate. And Sylas is a champion that can 1v9. You get enough stacks on your Medjais, and you can really take over a game. And I think if Harmer Life is going to win this game, they need Chovy to carry. I don't think we're at a point in the tournament anymore where we can expect Morgan, Willa, Deft, and Vista to be able to carry, because I think the quality of players left in the tournament now, we're starting to sort of see a drop-off in Harmer Life versus them. Morgan and Kana, for example, I think there's a massive a massive gap between those players. I think there's a massive gap between Carrier and Vista. I think there's a gap between Willa and Ona. I think the only other lane where you would say there isn't a gap per se is Gumayusi, Teddy, and Deft. But even still, you would still give that towards T1 over Harmer Life. So if Harmer Life are going to win this game, it needs to be off the back of some Church of Chovy. So that's why I think Sylas becomes so important in that. For Chovy, if he doesn't get his hands on Sylas and we see him revert to AD mids, I expect to see either Yone or Yasuo. He is the Yone Yasuo, where, you know how you have the meme where it's like the enemy team's Yone, the enemy team's Yasuo. He is that meme, because his Yone and Yasuo are so clean. And I think Yone is a champion that is very underrated in the meta right now. I actually think it's really, really strong, along with Yasuo as well. I think both these champions are very, very strong in the meta right now. But they are very overlooked because of the Twisted Fate priority, and also because mid laners' reluctancy to play AD mids. So Chovy, on the other hand, has shown he is very much happy to play AD mids, so I expect to see him at least pull out one of these champions once, whether it's the Yone or whether it's the Yasuo. In the bot lane, we have Deft. Deft, legacy player, he's had an amazing career. He's looking to get a best of 5 win at Worlds. It's something he's never actually done before, which is insane to think about. That, like, you think of Deft and you think of all the feats he has accomplished in his career. He's never actually won a best of 5 in quarterfinals at a Worlds tournament. When he was with KT, of course, they lost that series to IG 3-2. That's obviously the most recent one of his, along with last year, where we saw DRX have to take on Damwon. Damwon, again, of course, beat them 3-0. But both times, they lost to the team that would eventually win the tournament. So it's been a bit tough for Deft in best of 5s when it comes to quarterfinals. And, of course, he's looking to change that and get a win in a best of 5s quarterfinal at Worlds. Now, with Deft, the meta really suits his champion pool. He is an insane Misfortune player. He's an insane Aphelios. He actually is a really, really great Draven player. But the reason why I've got Ezreal here is because I think his Ezreal is something that Harmer Life will get him on this series. Because I expect them to sort of sack lane a little bit and play for late game team fights where they can maybe get a victory through a 5v5 win on an objective. And so Ezreal becomes a lot more, makes more sense for Harmer Life because Draven needs to get those stacks early to truly get the most out of the passive. Because once you have like multiple items and then you get a cash in, it's not as valuable as getting that cash in really early and being able to be an item ahead within the first 15-20 minutes of the game. So Ezreal to me makes a bit more sense. It allows Deft to scale up. It allows him to play pretty safely and allows Vista to then roam and try and help Willow out in the matchup against Ona. And also allows Vista to roam a bit as well to cover a bit for Morgan. Also, you want Vista and Willa covering for Morgan, and you want Vista helping out Willa because you want Chovy to be in lane as long as possible. He gets so many advantages in lane that you want to keep the laning phase going for as long as possible to keep Chovy getting those leads. I actually think him on Twisted Fate, for example, I was thinking about this the other day. I actually think it's kind of insane what you think about the possibility of Chovy on Twisted Fate. Because of course, Twisted Fate has the passive where you get additional gold per minion kill, and Chovy, he always gets 10 CS per game or something along those lines. So he's always CSing a lot, and he also gets so many advantages in lane. So to be able to take someone who has that much CS and getting that much CS per minute and then adding on to the Twisted Fate passive where you get additional gold per minion, he actually can accumulate a lot of gold really quickly and is someone who can really, really abuse that passive. So that was just something I was thinking about the other day, and we did see in his Twisted Fate games him get some really, really huge golds amount based on those passives. For Vista, I do expect him to play a lot of Leona, a lot of Thresh, and a lot of Amumu. Not necessarily because I think these are his strongest picks. I do think Leona is his strongest pick, to be fair. But I think Thresh, Amumu, Leona, I just expect him to want to pick champions that have hard engage. LCK and LPL bot lane, supports really, really like champions that have huge engage. That's why Leona is so strong. That's why a lot of them like to pick Thresh. And Vista as someone who's shown that he will pick the Amumu. And while Amumu's kind of gone out of favor a little bit, I can see them wanting to go back to possibly a Misfortune Amumu bot lane and try and attack the fact that Gumayusi and Teddy will probably be on their own for a period of time, as Carrier does like to roam. My concern though is that Carrier has a huge champion pool and Vista's is a lot more limited. So Carrier is someone who probably has some interesting picks ready for Vista's limited champion pool. But Vista, he's shown some highs, he's shown some lows, he's shown some good moments, especially on the Leona. So if Harm Life, I really want them to just pick Leona for him, to try and get him on at least Leona or Thresh, something that he's just comfortable on, that he can engage on, and that way then you don't... Something as well that's also a bit tanky. So I do like Leona. That way then if he does misstep a little bit, Leona is so hard to just burst, so Vista can be less punished for some of his misplays where he's like roaming or whether like he's standing on a ward or something along those lines. Lastly, of course, we're going to talk about the key matchups, and the key matchups are of course Kana versus Morgan. I think this is something where T1 have the biggest advantage in the game. I was defending Morgan before. This is not necessarily me knocking Morgan. This is more me talking about, I think Kana is a top 5 top laner in the world, and T1 like to play for Kana. So Kana to me, I think is going to be a bit too strong for Morgan. So Harm Life are going to really need to make sure that Willa is covering the and there for the counter gank, because Owner, I think, will be very predictable in his jungle paths. He's just going to try and set up for a gank every time on Morgan and try and get Kana ahead. So Willa, it's very important for this matchup how the jungle and how support roam for their top laner. If T1 have the advantage first, and obviously if Faker is on things like Twisted Fate, this can be a real big problem for Morgan. Morgan can get behind very, very quickly. For Harm Life, if Chovy is dominating the lane and pushing Faker in so that Faker can't roam, and Vista and Willa are matching the roams of Carrier and Owner, this top lane matchup isn't as volatile then, and Morgan should be able to hold his own a bit better than if he is pressured. But if we are going to talk about this game, we have to talk about the mid lane. The mid lane is the most hype mid lane matchup that we're going to probably have in quarters. I'm just trying to think of the other matches but Faker versus Chovy is legendary. You've got the greatest of all time versus a guy who is one world championship away from being considered one of the greatest to ever play. Chovy, the only reason why he gets a lot of criticism is because he doesn't have the championships to back up the pedigree of his play. And so that's why a lot of times people, they like to say that Chovy is a bit of a choker. I would argue, though, that Chovy, he hasn't been on the best teams, with the exception of Griffin. Like DRX, I don't think were that good of a team. They were very much Chovy carrying them. And again, with Harm Life, I think, is not even as strong as DRX was last year. So again, Chovy has carried them to a quarterfinals. So it's kind of the level of play that we've seen from Chovy. The question will be not if, but how much of a lead Chovy gets in the lane against Faker. As much as I love Faker, Chovy, how he's playing right now and how he plays lane right now, he will get advantages over Faker. So whether Chovy gets ganked and gets put behind that way, in a pure 1v1, Chovy will beat Faker. And so it does depend as well on what champions they select. That's why I really like a Yasuo, a Yone, or a Sylas, because I expect Chovy to get a lead in lane, but I want to see him be on a champion that, if it gets leads in lane, can then 1v9 the game afterwards. Things like Twisted Fate, for example, very hard for you to 1v9 that. So the lead that you get, generally you need to transfer on to other lanes. But unfortunately for Chovy, you can't really pass that lead on to Morgan or Willa. You could pass it on to Deft, but that's very, very tough ask in this meta to expect the ADC to be able to 1v9. So Chovy kind of has to play a little bit selfish. That's why I really want to see him on a Sylas, on a Yone, or on a Yasuo, these sort of champions that can 1v9. For Faker, it's about losing lane gracefully and being able to get enough push in lane to be able to roam for top lane and for bot lane and to help jungle get advantages there. Because for T1, you feel that you win in every other aspect pretty comfortably. The only aspect where you feel, Harm or Life might get advantages is through that mid lane. So as long as you don't lose drastically, or you just lose gracefully, or you go even, that pretty much would guarantee a win for T1, because Chovy's going to need to get a huge lead in order to be able to carry these games. So finally, my prediction for this game, as much as Harm or Life have been ramping up, and I think they've had a commendable tournament so far, and certainly they were a team that was like 8th in the LCK, something like that. So for them to get to this point is actually a really great achievement, and they should be very proud, and their fans should also be very, very proud of their gameplay. And the nature of best of fives, going against T1 is actually one of the best options Harm or Life could have had. Obviously, to me, I think the best option for Harm or Life would have been Gen G, because I think Gen G's a bit closer in ability to Harm or Life than Harm or Life is to T1. But the familiarity of LCK matchup will allow Harm or Life to be a lot more comfortable in this matchup than going against, say, an RNG, where they don't have much experience playing. Going up against, say, an EDG, or, going against even like, say, a Cloud9 or a Mad Lions, because while you might rate them to be able to beat C9 and Mad Lions, the unfamiliarity of the fact that they aren't LCK, that they've never really played against them before in a professional game, means it's a lot harder for them to gauge, and they'd have to sort of learn a bit more on the fly. They have a lot of tape, they have a lot of experience playing against T1, so that is a massive strength and advantage Harm or Life have, as opposed to facing some of these other teams. Having said that, though, it goes both ways, and T1 will feel very, very comfortable in a matchup against Harm or Life. When they got that draw, I'm sure T1 were very happy with getting Harm or Life as their quarterfinal, and I do expect T1 to be too strong. I think with the exception of Chovy, the lanes, the other positions are just too much of a gap for Chovy to overcome. I do expect this one to be 3-1. I do actually see the way Harm or Life has been ramping up for them to be able to take a game off T1. Whether they would be able to take more than one, though, is where it becomes a bit more tricky for them. So expecting Harm or Life to win 3 games against T1, I think, is very unrealistic. So T1, expect them to go 3-1. Expect them to once again make it to semifinals of yet another Worlds as they continue their campaign to make history and win yet another Worlds Championship. Well, there you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Let me know what you thought about that one. Do you agree? Do you think T1's going to win? Do you think it's going to be 3-0 or 3-2 or 3-1? Or do you think the Church of Chovy is going to be able to pull a miracle and defeat T1 and make it to semifinals? But always stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you next time.